Education Secretary Dan French saying his goodbyes to the state he's served since 2018. French will step down from his cabinet role to pursue a senior leadership position at the Council of Chief State School Officers. I chat with French about Vermont's report card and his time on Governor Phil Scott's team. Vermont Education Secretary Dan French, thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
You led Vermont schools through the pandemic, and recent statewide test results show students are still struggling from that learning loss. Even pre-COVID, though, proficiency rates were low, and you started in this position 2 years before the pandemic in 2018. Why didn't the test scores improve during your tenure?
You know, the trends in our performance were there before my tenure. And certainly, as you mentioned, the pandemic hasn't helped in terms of those outcomes. But if there's an upside to the pandemic, I think it's that we've been able to focus our efforts as a state and focus on priorities, and particularly literacy outcomes. We were very successful with our pandemic work to get the partnership of the General Assembly to acknowledge in Act 28 that literacy outcomes are foundational and need to be improved.
And as you leave, what is in the works in AOE to address these education issues for the people who will now assume your role?
Consider your primary grades, your early students who probably lost valuable instruction on basic skills of literacy and math. I think, those students, their needs are being remediated through our investments in after-school, summer school programs, tutorials, and so forth. So I think those students are getting back on track. I'll flip and talk about the high school age students for a minute, because I think, in that case, we're really talking about getting students back on track to obtain their high school, college, and career readiness goals, whether it be going to college or a career path. And I think districts have been really working hard to bring in remote learning opportunities, again, summer school, after school, to make sure the course taking patterns are back on track. I think, the area that's probably the most concern for us at the agency, and I think around the country as well, are the middle level students. For them, so much of how they learn is based on the socialization and the social learning environment, which also was disrupted during the pandemic. We have to just really focus on the social emotional needs of those students.
Why hasn't the teacher shortage been adequately addressed yet?
We're certainly seeing, I would argue, the effects of what a trend that existed predating the pandemic, and that's the population of northern New England is getting older. Vermont's one of the oldest states in the country. We also knew that fewer people are entering the education profession.
In your role as Education Secretary, what are you most proud of accomplishing?
Well, certainly the work of the pandemic is so unique, I think, in a lot of ways. I think it was hopefully an exceptional historic moment. And I'm very proud of how, as a state, we came together. Certainly incredibly honored and proud to have served in Governor Scott's cabinet. Literally every agency and department contributed to our success in education in the pandemic. That's a high point in my career. Outside of the pandemic itself, when I started in 2018, we were in the difficult phase of Act 46, the forced district consolidation. And I thought at the time that would be far and away the most controversial thing that we ever took on. Our legal oversight of that policy was essentially flawless.
Education Secretary Dan French, thanks so much for being here and good luck.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure.